Sorry to whoever's watching this, there we go. Good enough. All right, you don't need to actually watch me recording this up. There we go. So, we are going to graph a system of inequalities. And we do it the same way we just did the equations. We just have to do a little bit of shading. So to do so, I'm going to start with the first inequality. And I'm going to say, I really like that slope-intercept form. So I rearrange, and I get y by itself. So to do so, I'm going to move the 2x. Okay, so that wasn't too bad, just kind of move things around. I'm going to divide by -3. Just as a reminder, this is like going back to your algebra skills from prior classes. When I divide by a negative with an inequality, you have to flip it. So just little things pop up like that. That's what I like today, kind of remind us of all those little rules. 2 negatives make a positive 2/3 x. And when I divide that, I get -2. Okay, so that wasn't terrible. So let's just graph that one, then we'll deal with the second one in a minute. So when I'm graphing this, same idea, mx plus b, I go to -2, put my point. I'm going to rise 2, run 3. So the big thing to remember, or not remember, I will remind you in case you forgot. When I'm connecting these, I have to look at my inequality. It's very similar to open circle, closed circle. You have to kind of remind yourself to look. If you have an inequality without a line underneath, you are going to connect them with a dotted line. If you have that or equal to, then it will be solid. So that's like similar to putting an open circle. It's just now we're doing it as an entire line. So we do the dots to remind ourselves. Technically, there's no points on that line. It's just kind of a barrier. And then we have to shade because we have an inequality. So I read my inequality. It says y is less than this line. So when I think about less than this line, I'm going to shade everything below it. So just kind of do something, nothing too fancy because we still have a whole other line to do. But just so you can see, that's kind of my shading. I like to do one at a time. If not, I get all confused about what's going on. But that's where we start. So let's do the second inequality now. So I kind of tried to leave you a little space to do your rearranging. I'm going to try to get y by itself, isolate y. I'm going to move 4x. And I'm going to divide. As I'm dividing, I'm kind of reducing along the way. I do not need to flip this time because I'm not dividing by a negative. So I just kind of keep my inequality. That will give me 2/3 x plus 3. Okay. So I'm going to go up to 3. I'm going to rise 2, run 3. This is also going to be a dotted line because there's no or equal to underneath. And then I'm going to shade. And this says y is less than this line. So I'm going to shade everything below that line. I try to kind of just do it in a different way, so I'll do mine. You can use 2 colors, you can use whatever you please. Our main goal to look for, whereas in the first page you were kind of looking for one specific point, here we're just looking for a section of the graph where the shading meets. So we can see, that's why I kind of do it in 2 different directions. You can see in this section there's only the shading from that, but if I come down here, I can see that the shading is meeting. So that region of the graph, I can always like make it a little bit nicer looking. but that region of the graph is my answer. So you're not just gonna get one answer, your answer is a whole section. So I'll leave that up for a second, and then we'll do one more. Okay, so let's try one more. We're gonna try one. If you kind of look down, you see some absolute values. I just want to remind you, we did a little bit of graphing with them, which is some of the stuff that you're looking for. We'll just try one or two. We only have about 15-ish minutes till they start annoying us with all their announcements. So I'm just gonna pick number 9. I just picked kind of a random one, so I picked it right down. So with number 9, it's okay. The first one is looking pretty similar to what we just did. We do have an absolute value as part of one of them, just as we'll remind ourselves what we're doing there. So I'll start with the first inequality. Pretty quick. Go to the y-intercept of -3. The slope would just be 1, right? So I'm going to rise 1, run 1. And then once I have some points, I'm going to connect them, in this case with a dotted line, because there's no or equal to underneath. And then I'm going to shade. So my shading or my inequality says y is less than that graph or that line. So I'm going to shade everything below that line. Just general, doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of get an idea. Okay, so that one wasn't too terrible, very similar to the ones we've already seen. What we do notice is the second one is an absolute value. So what you want to do is just remind yourself of a few things. The first thing, we're really thinking about that V shape and the translation of it. So we talked about translations first for a reason. The reason we're thinking of the translation is we want to know where the vertex of that V is, so the point of the V. And what the translation is telling us is we took this function and we're moving it to the right 4, and it's not being moved up or down. So I know the vertex is at 4, 0. It's important. Anything in math, we know it always kind of builds off itself. So we just want to make sure we're keeping up as we go, because all that stuff will pop back up. You can kind of do two things from here. You can either choose a few other points, like we were doing when we were doing piecewise functions, or you can say, hey, I have this equation. Whatever the coefficient is in front of this absolute value, we're assuming there's a 1 there. It looks kind of weird, so it looks like 11, but there's a 1. That's your slope. Okay? We usually would say that would be what was compressing or stretching, but it's not being compressed or stretched, it's just 1. It's just normal. But if there's ever a number out in front, that's your slope of your absolute value. So basically all it's saying is I would rise 1, run 1. But since it's a V, I'd also go in the opposite direction. But the slope of either line, 1 to 1 and 1 to 3. You just have to have a few points in it, nothing crazy. Before we connect it, I look, and this is going to be solid because that 4 equal to is underneath. And then just think about your shading. Y is greater than or equal to the absolute value. My V greater than is going to be above V. So I'm going to shade everything above V. You do just want to make sure it's obvious because sometimes we get all sorts of crazy. Where your actual answer is where the two shadings are meeting. And they're meeting in this section right there. So if you looked at my graph right now, you'd be able to tell, yep, that's where they're meeting. So always go back and make it a little bit more obvious. But that's your answer. Once again, you're not giving me an answer, you're not telling me a point. I'm looking at a graph and I'm saying that whole region is your answer. So today was just kind of like, okay, it's been a while since we did some of these forms. These little things to remember, like vertical, horizontal, hiccups, slope, intercepts. When you're talking about absolute value, the vertex, solid or dotted line, how you shade. So lots of little things. But it's good to remind us now so that as we see things later, hopefully, they're fresh in our head. So as of right now, does anyone think that they have any questions or issues or problems? Okay, so I'm gonna kind of give you these last few minutes. Once again, in like 8 minutes, they're gonna start calling people, and I'm gonna get annoyed.